Intimidation. We've got Saturday night races coming. What should they do about Spa Francorchamps, and who is still receiving penalties from Austria? Let's go racing.
They exist in a world beyond ours. This is Formula One.
It is a very good evening and welcome to the LGR F1 Show, coming to you live, of course, from our wonderful bespoke studio at the Mainland Shopping Centre, proudly brought to us by Suzuki South Africa and, of course, the Penta Motor Group. This weekend, the British Grand Prix. As always, love for you to get in touch, so please use the WhatsApp line. You can get in touch there. Otherwise, post on Facebook, post on YouTube. I'll try and go through some of your comments during the course of the show. Otherwise, I will respond to them when I get back to a chance as well. Let's go back to last weekend. Austria. We had a sprint race. We had a main race. Now, I don't know about you. The sprint race qualifying was fantastic. The normal qualifying was fantastic. Of course, it lends itself to being that way, especially at Austria at the Red Bull Ring, because it is a very short lap and we know that the cars are going to be very, very close to each other. However, I'm not sure, I don't see the purpose of these sprint races. Comment during the course of this evening, what is the purpose of the sprint race? I don't see anything really that exciting about them. I think they're a little bit too short. It just doesn't work for me. I love the sprint qualifying, but the sprint race itself doesn't really work for me. There were penalties galore that were handed out in the main race at this past Grand Prix, and I think they're still handing out penalties at the moment from from the race. Those penalties, of course, came for track limits. And during the course of the race, we had the commentator saying, oh, watch out this driver, watch out that driver, more and more penalties. And it was only after the race that we actually, about 5 hours later, did we actually get a full confirmation of the finishing positions of the Austrian Grand Prix, because the penalties took so long to get sorted out. Can it be fixed in terms of track limits? We've got to ask ourselves the question. It is the same for everybody at the circuit. How come it was only 8 drivers that got penalties, the other 12 did not? You have 3 strikes and then you're out when it comes to track limits at any circuit. Go over the 3, you get the black and white, or go over the 2, you get the black and white flag. Third time you do it, you get a 5-second penalty. I don't see what the complication is. The biggest problem that we had over the course of the weekend was the time it took to determine if there were track limit infringements. And that's where maybe the FIA and the stewards need better technology in order to identify it. But think about it very carefully. You've got 20 cars coming around that track, and yes, after 5 or 6 laps, then of course the field is spread out a little bit. But you've got 20 cars that are coming around the circuit, and they're coming through turns 9 and turn 10. Who is going to watch all of those infringements? It means they have to go back, they have to look at all of the very fancy cameras that they've gotten from there. Then they determine, Ocon went over, so-and-so went over, and now we sit and say, okay, strike 1, strike 2. And then eventually we go, sorry, you've gone over 3 times, you've got your 5-second penalty. What are they going to do? People have come out with comments saying, put a brick wall there and that's going to change it. The commentators say, well, when it's wet weather, of course they stay on the black lines, between the white lines. Of course they're going to do that. because in wet weather, if you go onto that white paint, it is going to affect the condition of the car, the grip of the car, and more than likely that will make you spin. But in dry conditions, these drivers want to try and get the most out that they can in terms of that specific lap. Whether they go out over a couple of millimeters is unfortunate. I don't see that anything needs to change. Perhaps just FIA timing, in the sense of trying to get these infringements done quicker than as opposed to the 5 hours after the Grand Prix, and so got 10 places and another 10 seconds, and another driver got another couple of 10 seconds, and then of course we adjusted the finishing order. It is something that I think the FIA needs to work on it, but in terms of tracks, I don't think the Red Bull Ring has to do anything. I think these are just drivers who are trying to find the limit all of the time, and sometimes they go over the limit. It's not the end of the world. This past weekend, of course, it was a significant milestone, especially for the Ferrari team. Charles Leclerc got onto the podium, and a spectacular drive from him, and it gave Ferrari their 800th podium in Formula One, which is pretty significant. I think it's something very special. I'm sure he would have wanted the top step, but Charles Leclerc will be very, very happy with the performance improvement of the Ferrari, especially at this Grand Prix. Intimidation, what a word this is. And I'm going to give Carlos Sainz the benefit of the doubt with this. If you missed the Grand Prix over the weekend, it was on 2 or 3 occasions, I think it was on 2 occasions, that Carlos Sainz was talking to his team wall saying, Sergio Perez is intimidating me, is intimidating me. Carlos Sainz is Spanish, and perhaps his interpretation of definition of intimidation is a little bit different to what the English definition is. And I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps it wasn't the word that he was looking for. Isn't it normal in the world of sport, and sometimes even in the world of business, to try and intimidate your opponent? We've seen it on the tennis court, we've seen it on soccer fields, we've seen it on rugby fields. People, it's either with a stare or it's with a body movement. Intimidation is part of the game, and that's why I think that Carlos Sainz might have used an incorrect word. I don't know. But it is part of the game, and your opponent, and specifically fellow drivers, are of course going to try and intimidate you, which means driving too close to you, wheel to wheel. It's just the nature of the game. So I feel for Carlos Sainz, because I think the world sat there and went, oh, intimidate, intimidate, intimidate. It's part of the game. Unfortunately, I think it was just a little bit lost in translation. Coming up in a few moments from now, Saturday night races and Spa Francorchamps. Welcome back. It is the LGR F1 Show. We left Intimidation with Carlos Sainz. A couple of comments coming through. Euclid, there we go. First this time. Well done, Euclid. You win the sprint race. Roland, how's it? Colin, how's it as well? Sprint race format also, I don't like it. Couple of opinions coming through. Howard says sprint race is stupid. Sprint race would be good if dominance was not a feature. Oh, I don't know how to answer that. Maybe a reverse grid. I think that's just too animated, but it is a point. Sprint races are kind of short, machine gun-like penalties, ridiculous, allow a bit of track limit variation. Also, pretty decent point there as well. Those boys need to stop bitching and stay within the limits. Quite simple. That's exactly what I said. It's the same for everybody. Try and do your best. Lucien, lovely to hear from you. Lovely to see you. Howard, nice to see you as well. Colin, intimidation, part of sport. Thank goodness no one recorded me intimidating my opponents on the rugby field. There we go. We all understand it, that is intimidation, and that is what sport is all about. I mean, if you can get the psychological edge over your opponent, that is a form of intimidation. Last weekend, tragedy struck again at Spa Francorchamps in a support race to the 24-hour Spa Francorchamps race. We unfortunately had another single-seater accident, very similar to the one that occurred, that took the life of Antoine Hubert. We'll remember that from just a couple of years ago. This time it was an 18-year-old by the name of Delano van 't Hof. It's tragic. It's terrible. 18 years old, losing another life in a very, very similar kind of accident to that of Antoine Hubert. We've said it countless times. I say it to everybody that I speak to. Motorsport is a very dangerous sport. And unfortunately, it gets desensitized by shows that turn this motorsport worldwide into something that is a reality show. It is not a reality show. It is live. It's people's lives on the line every single time they get into a car. And I'm not just talking Formula One. I'm talking everything, whether it's two wheels, whether it's four wheels, whether it's sidecars, you name it. Any form of motorsport is extremely dangerous. What can be done and what should be done? Because both of these two fatalities have happened at Spa Francorchamps, very similar conditions, and that is, of course, going through Eau Rouge, coming up, and then, of course, driving towards Radion. We won't show you the pictures. On your left-hand side of your screen, you can see that he's coming out of Eau Rouge, coming up in the dry conditions and sunny. On your right-hand screen, those were the conditions that led to this unfortunate and tragic accident that happened last weekend. Lance Stroll came out and said, every time we go through Eau Rouge, there's an accident waiting to happen. Today it happened again, and we lost a young kid. This is now open for debate. There are some people that say, well, Spa needs to change. How do you change it? What do you do at Spa Francorchamps in order to try and make it safe? After the incident with Antoine Hubert, they did make significant changes to the Eau Rouge going into the Radion section, which is basically the top left-hander on your screen. A lot of people get mistaken that Eau Rouge is at the top. It's actually at the bottom, and that corner going into the right hand where you can see the cars, that is Eau Rouge. After that, we go into the second part of the corner, and then we drive down to Radion. What can we do? What should we do when it comes to Spa Francorchamps? Here are a couple of things. If we go through Eau Rouge and we come up, and now we're on the Radion straight, on the right-hand side there is wall, and this is where both of these incidents have happened. The accident has happened where a car has spun out, has gone into the wall, and unfortunately the car has projected itself back into the racing track itself. From there, another car has hit it. Terribly unfortunate. Spa Francorchamps made some changes. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem that it is enough. Where they made the changes, going further on, you've got the forest on the right-hand side, and this becomes a problem. That forest is very, very steep. To push that wall back is going to be extremely expensive. Others have said, put a chicane in at Eau Rouge. I can't say that I agree with that. And maybe my point of view is a little bit controversial. Leave it as it is. That's the nature of motor racing. Of course, I am devastated that a young person has lost their life in motor racing this past weekend. And every time it happens, no matter what discipline it is, I get cold shivers because I just am so passionate about the sport. However, we cannot now sanitize this wonderful sport that we love, that it is completely 100% safe. It will never be completely 100% safe. I'm sure that the powers that be, the engineers, and the very, very clever people will go and try and find a better solution. I want to throw this into the mix. What happens if you come out of Saint-Devote at Monaco and it's pouring with rain? You flying up the hill to the casino, and all of a sudden you spin out and hit the wall and come back into the track, okay, just before you go down to the Mirabeau. And another car comes through Saint-Devote going flat out. The people on his team are not telling him what's going on, and he smashes. Does that mean we have to change Monaco? The Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Guys are driving at 350 kilometers down the straight with brick walls next to them. God forbid an accident should happen and a car spins, hits that wall and goes into the middle of the track with somebody following very, very close behind them, and an accident happens. Do we now all of a sudden stop the Saudi Grand Prix? It's something that I think we can debate. My personal opinion, we've got to leave it as it is. Those conditions are conditions that perhaps the stewards need to look at more carefully, and together with their pace car, the pace car needs to determine, no, it is not safe for those cars to go up that hill at that kind of a speed, because there is a chance that they can have an accident. So there's lots of communications that need to take place in order to try and not have that situation again, especially in those conditions. That's where I'll leave it on the Spa crash, but my thoughts, of course, to Delano van Toff, and of course his family, and the whole motorsport community. I'd love to hear your opinions on Spa Francorchamps, Monaco, Russia, any circuit. Any circuit can have an accident. Any circuit can throw us these uncertainties and have horrific consequences. It is the nature of motorsport. Now, earlier on today, the FIA released the provisional 2024 calendar. No, there's no South Africa, unfortunately. But there are 24 races on the calendar for 2024. And let's have a look what the major changes are. And I think there's some very, very clever changes. We've got 24 races. There is a move to more regionalized calendar, which I think is a lot more sensible, much more economically viable. It's pointless teams flying from Europe to the United States, then back to Europe, and then back to South America. It just doesn't make any sense. So it's a much more regionalized calendar. However, I must stipulate it is a provisional calendar at the moment. Next year, however, we will see Bahrain and Saudi Arabia that will have Saturday night races in respect to Ramadan, and I think that's going to be fabulous. And the Chinese Grand Prix returns for the first time since 2019, which, yeah, I think is going to be great. The Chinese Grand Prix, always a lot of fun as well. So that is provisional. I'm sure by the end of October, which is usually when the FIA release the confirmed calendar, we will get something very, very similar to what we are seeing right now. Remember Bridgestone? Yes, of course, lots of people drive with Bridgestone tires. Bridgestone is still very active in the world of motorsport, and they were very, very active in the world of Formula One, especially from the mid-1990s all the way up until the end of the first decade of the new millennium, and had a tremendous amount of success. They are looking to come back into the world of Formula One. And it's quite a tricky deal to come and do, because there are huge stipulations that the FIA put out, what is required, how they have to do it. They have to be sponsors of Formula 2 and of Formula 3 as well. Pirelli, who have done an exceptional job since they've returned to Formula 1, are also now going into the world of not MotoGP itself, but Moto 2 and Moto 3. So very interesting that Pirelli might sit there and say, you know what, we've had enough of Formula 1, let's start moving to some other kind of category. I don't know if that is an opening. I don't think Pirelli would want to give up their status in the world of Formula One right now, considering how popular the sport is. I think it is a great, great advertising vehicle for someone like Pirelli. But Bridgestone are definitely knocking on the door very, very much. So they are looking for that option round about 2026. Monza, which comes up in September, will be the next qualifying experiment. Earlier on this year, I think we had our first one. And that is that in qualifying at Monza, what will happen is that in Q1, everyone's got to use the hard tyre. In Q2, everyone's got to use the medium tyre. In Q3, everyone has got to use the soft tyre, which is also another way of going, oh, look, we're going to change something. No, it's actually exactly the same. Because, you know, in my opinion, sit there and say, top 5 teams got to use the hard tyre. Middle 5 teams, top 3 teams got to use the hard tyre. Next 3 teams have got to use the medium tyre. And the bottom 4 teams can use whatever tyre. That makes it a little bit more spicy. Maybe that's something they should consider for the sprint race as well. You sit there and say, hold on a second, if you're on pole position, you've got to use X tyre. But maybe it is too animated, it's too fabricated, it's not real. Okay. We'll leave that to another decision. But Monza is the Grand Prix that we will have that next qualifying experiment. Okay, coming up, the British Grand Prix. Okay, here we are. Welcome back. I was just checking out some of the comments. Euclid says, very dangerous. That is it. Colin says, they are gladiators. Angelo, nice to hear from you all the way from Cape Town. Very sad. The only thing to do is move the walls, but racing is dangerous. There are tracks that are even more dangerous. Nikki says, agree with you. Colin says, I disagree, Sash. They haven't had multiple deaths. We need to learn that a part of a track is dangerous. Colin, when I say multiple deaths, if you look at the death rate in the world of Formula One or single-seater racing over the last 20 years compared to the previous 40 years, we get incredibly upset by deaths nowadays because safety has become so brilliant over all of those years. In the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, it unfortunately was not uncommon for drivers to die every week. That's how dangerous things were back in those days. So I hear you, but any death is one too many, especially when it comes to the sport that we love so much. But can we prevent it? No. Is it possible to prevent it? Yes. Don't race. It's harsh, but it's the reality of what it is. Any circuit is dangerous, but consistent crashes need to be reviewed. Very good point, and I think this is where we're at. Controversial opinion, but as you rightly said, it's racing. Euclid says the FIA are running a spray simulation this weekend with Mercedes and McLaren, running a special cover over the rear wheels this weekend. Hopefully that could help in rainy conditions. Okay, I wasn't aware of that. Thank you. It'll be interesting to see. I wonder, perhaps in free practice 1. I would love a new tyre manufacturer. Yeah, sometimes change is good. So we'll see whether or not Pirelli is still there in a couple of years, or whether or not Bridgestone makes a return to Formula One. Ah, guess who's here? No, it's not Eva Green, it's Kimmy! Yes, Kimi Räikkönen and his wonderful wife Mintu have just added another baby to the other two that they have, Robin and Rihanna. And Kimi Räikkönen, of course, going to return to NASCAR Cup Series at the Circuit of the Americas this month. Whenever there is a chance, I will always give you news about Kimi Räikkönen, one of my favorite drivers of all time. And, well, what would the show be without the obligatory Eva Green? The delightful Eva Green. Okay, there we go. Thank you, Fritz. Let's move on. This weekend, it is the British Grand Prix at the magnificent Silverstone circuit, the home of the first ever Formula One Grand Prix back in 1950. It is built on a disused airfield. This is information you might know, but I thought let's refresh your memory. It is open to the elements. So unlike places like Austria, where we were last weekend, where you have mountains and protects us from various elements, this is completely open. Wind plays a huge factor around the circuit, especially when they bring in the purpose-built stands, and of course the wind gushes through those various elements. The rain, the weather in England we'll get to in a short while, but it is a magnificent place. My concern this weekend is we are probably going to have some kind of protest. It has happened at the Ashes cricket in the UK so far in the last week. It happened at Wimbledon yesterday. It is a Stop Oil campaign protesters who are protesting. I have my own personal opinion. I'm not going to mention it here on this show, but I hope it doesn't happen, but it more than likely will. Don't forget when we had the huge Wang Yu Zhou accident at Silverstone last time out, the protesters were there and nobody really noticed them because we had this huge accident. It is more than likely going to happen. I just hope that, number one, it doesn't happen, in the beginning of the race or during the course of the race, because I think that could be, well, it's not going to be very enjoyable. Now, we have to talk about Lewis Hamilton. Lewis Hamilton owns Silverstone. It is his home. He has raced there many, many times. He has won 8 times around the Silverstone circuit. He's arrived at Silverstone with his wonderful dog, Rocco. He's wearing outrageous outfits as always. The British public adore Lewis Hamilton. They didn't have a good week out in Austria last week. However, they are actually looking pretty decent this weekend as well. So, well, they should be looking pretty decent this weekend as well. They've got a brand new front wing. I think it's going to serve very, very well. And yeah, I just have a feeling that Mercedes are going to be on it this weekend as opposed to how they were in Austria last weekend. But this is the home for Lewis Hamilton. He's going to have a massive amount of fans. And I think after having a un-Lewis-like weekend in Austria, he'll want to correct that and definitely try and go for the podium. He did come out and say the crowd over there is amazing. He said he hopes it brings him at least 0.4, 0.5 of a second because they desperately need it. I think everybody needs at least a second, never mind half a second. This weekend, we're going to have a huge amount of celebrities. There's going to be musos. But what is going to look really spectacular, and I hope the television pictures that we get do it justice, are there a couple of cars that are going to have very, very special liveries. Those are going to be Aston Martin, the Williams. You can see with the British flag at the back of the Williams, Aston looking a little more green. But the McLaren, staying with the papaya colors, however, going back to the silver arrows that we so significantly remember when they were sponsored by West, the days of David Coulthard, the days of Mika Hakkinen, very, very special looking cars. That's what the McLaren is going to look like. Lando Norris last weekend in Austria with the new updates was outstanding. This weekend, both drivers are going to have those update packages with them. And It is also. It's the home for, I think, 8 out of the 10 teams. Everyone is based in the UK besides the Alpha Tauri team and, of course, Ferrari. The rest are all based in the UK. So it's a home Grand Prix for everybody, including the likes of Red Bull, because they're just down the road. The McLaren, I think, is going to look spectacular. I cannot wait to see it on the TV screens tomorrow. This weekend, tyres, as always. If without them, we wouldn't go racing. Pirelli are going to be bringing the C1, the C2, and the C3 compounds, which are the hardest compounds of their respective brands that they have. The difference is, this weekend, it is a different made. Oh, I've got this all completely wrong in my mind. We've got the 3 compounds, C1, C2, and C3, the medium, the soft, and the hard. The construction of the tire this weekend and from here on going forward is different to what we have had. They have made the construction of these tires stronger. And the reason for that is the data that they collected at the tests at the beginning of the year and as the races have gone on is that these cars are too fast, and they are worried that some of these tires could actually disintegrate and perish a little bit too quickly. So they're going with a different kind of construction of these tires. It's for all of the teams. There's a lot of load on these tires this coming weekend. There's a fine balance where you need the downforce going through the tricky cornering bits of Silverstone, but you want also less drag, especially for the long straights at Silverstone. So it's an engineering masterpiece, whoever can get their setup correct for this coming Grand Prix. The likes of Red Bull, we know, are going to be fantastic. Ferrari were good in Austria. This one, they're not entirely sure, but I think they're playing a little cagey game because I think this track should suit them. Team to watch out for, especially on the long straights, Williams. Williams have been super fast in the long straights. Can they find that balance going into the corners? And Mercedes, definitely an unknown entity. In my opinion, Aston Martin, somehow got to lift up their socks. The last 2 Grand Prix haven't been that successful for them, although Alonso, of course, was on the podium in 2 races ago in Canada. They weren't really on it. So Aston, I think, got to pick up the pace. Another team that I would say watch out for this weekend, besides McLaren, is Alpine. I think Alpine are beginning to get their mojo together. They didn't have a great Austrian Grand Prix. I think Ocon had like 1 lap that he was actually on the track. The rest of them, he was all over the place. But Ocon and Gasly, I think, could do something quite special this weekend. The British public, of course, won't disappoint, and I'm sure the weather won't disappoint as well. So what can we expect weather-wise? Looks like tomorrow is going to be okay. However, Saturday, there is a chance of rain, and Sunday, it might not rain during the race. However, it more than likely is going to rain before the race. But in the UK, you never know. So weather is an unknown entity for all of us. It does always throw everything awry. Pit stops are going to be critical. You don't lose a lot of time at Silverstone. And if we're in dry conditions, the preferred strategy, all depending on the tyre wear and degradation, more than likely will be a one-stopper, the hard and the medium compound around Silverstone. However, these are new tyres that are going to be used. It's a question of how do we get them into the right window, and I'm sure we're going to see a lot of long runs taking place tomorrow during free practice 1. Speaking of which, when can we watch the Grand Prix? And, oh no, let's look at the circuit. Sorry, let's go back to the wonderful circuit. And of course, Silverstone just is a magic place. The speed that they go around is quite phenomenal. Hopefully we'll get quite a bit of footage. I believe that there are going to be a couple of drivers driving some classic cars around the track as well. So I think it's going to be a wonderful experience as always. When you come out of turn 1 and you go through turns 3, 4, and 5, and then of course you come through 9, and then you go into Beckett's Copse. It just is something stunning. Up the hanger straight, there are lots of opportunities to overtake. Can everybody stay within 1 second of the Red Bulls in order to utilize the DRS zones? We'll have to wait for this weekend. And that's another point I wanted to bring up. Maybe on the sprint races and also in the normal races. After the first lap, DRS should be available. Why do we have to wait for 2 laps? Just another point I was thinking about. Okay, let's have a look at our TV times for this weekend. It's going to be an action-packed, very, very busy weekend. 1:30 to 2:30 tomorrow afternoon. 5 until 6 is practice 2. 12:30 to 1:30 on Saturday is practice 3. 4 until 5 is qualifying, which is great because I think it's just before the Bach test. I think the Bach test is at 5. Is it at 5? Yeah, I'm getting the nod. Somewhere around there. So we can watch the qualifying, and then on Sunday the race at 4 o'clock. I really believe we're going to have a spectacular British Grand Prix, as we always do every single year. Red Bull, are they making it boring? Is Max Verstappen making it boring? You can't take anything away from Red Bull and Max Verstappen. The other teams are going to have to lift their games. We've been through it before. Can Sergio Perez match Max Verstappen? That's what we want to see, because if we get the 2 of them racing, that of course maybe can bring the field together. Either way, it's going to be a spectacular weekend. Thanks very much. Lots of comments still coming through. I will go through them and reply to them as well. But as always, thank you very much for watching, and enjoy the Grand Prix this weekend. Let's go racing.